Welcome to Video 6 in this NBA Workbook series, which deals with using machine learning to enhance predictions. Now, you might recall in a previous video that we used functions as a method to generate our own predictions, and we discussed in some detail how functions could be combined, used with conditional statements such as ifs, the if function to produce a final fantasy point prediction. However, what we did not do was discuss in any depth how you might focus into what would constitute a good and accurate prediction based on past data, or in other words, the whole principle of machine learning, which allows you to look at past data sets and use them to generate formula for future prediction, and that's basically what we're going to do here. So this is the practice of linear regression analysis, which feeds the workbook fantasy point estimator. So the machine learning tool we will be using is called linear regression analysis. The reason we're going to use that tool is because it is fully and excellently supported in Excel. So I don't want to make this particular video a treatise on machine learning or linear regression. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to direct you to YouTube, which has many excellent and not so excellent videos regarding linear regression. So if you just search using linear regression and linear regression with Excel and similar sort of searches, you'll see an abundance of information. It is somewhat necessary to understand the concepts behind linear regression, but in case you don't have or you only get a rudimentary grasp of it, I'm basically going to use the regression module in Excel as a black box and show you how to squeeze formulas out the other side. So I think without further ado we'll switch to an NBA dataset which I have and do a few examples of linear regression. So this workbook will be made available by link near the video on the website, but essentially what it is some 65,000 or so records which deal with player by game performance data. It starts on 27th of October 2015 and it ends early February 2017. So whilst it's good for demonstration for the current season, we probably might like to get a little bit more up to date, but what this file has is it has all kinds of nuggets of data which correspond to that specific player on that date, with the team fixture, minutes played, stuff, all good stuff like that. And perhaps the most important one for our analysis is the FanDuel fantasy points scored on that particular game. Now, how was this put together? It was basically scraped from various sites around the web, and for example, something like the 30-day moving average or the 2-game moving average was simply generated by code which is included in the VBA module. So if you look at this function here, for example, moving average, player name, games and row start, all it does is it goes to this sheet and it says maybe I want to know about this player, so how many points did he score from this row back in other games, and it so if it were, for example, a 3-game moving average, it would look for Amir Johnson's name anywhere above here and take the first 3 scores it found and produce a moving average. So that's essentially how it was put together. Here's me calling this public function here, moving average DeMarcus Cousins 20 games from row 57,000 on the sheet. So if I change that to 30 games, it produces it. So that's essentially how it was put together, and this is how you might like to do your own thing in the future, because all this data is pretty well and easily obtainable on the internet if you're good at copying and pasting and basically screen scraping, that sort of stuff. So the whole name of this game is to predict the FanDuel fantasy points. So and once again, I'm assuming you've researched somewhat linear regression. So our y function, or the stuff that we want to predict, is the FanDuel fantasy points value. So what I'm going to do is, actually first, before I do this, I've taken one other step. This worksheet is essentially this worksheet with the top 1,000 or so records cut off. The reason I did that was because if you look at the top of this sheet, the trends are 0, of course. There's no trend if you don't have any past games. So to make this a more plausible analysis, I chopped off the top 1,000 or so records until I started having enough data, game data, to get some trends. So now we are down to 60,000 or so records, so it's still a good data set to glean some trends from. So let's start simple with our analysis, and let's grab the FanDuel fantasy points column here. Just put it over here. This will be apparent later why we have to do this. We need to get them sort of in a line. So that's going to be what I want to predict, and I'm going to take the basic one. We know that every data file we download from FanDuel has the long-term average fantasy points scored by a player. So I'm going to put in the 30-day moving average there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can establish a relationship between those two things. I hope I can, because a lot of people use just the past averages of fantasy points scored to rate the player for future performance. So let's just do this. Let's have a look by eye first to see if we can see a relationship visually. Here we go. Now, not surprising, all I've done here is I've plotted fantasy points against past 30-day moving averages of fantasy points, and we can immediately see there appears to be a relationship. Although it is a bit fuzzy, there is some high variance there. So if I how can I add some? Let's see, I haven't done this for a while. Okay, so I could insert, here we are, chart design. Let's get that here. Add an element, so I'm going to add a trend line. So let's put a linear trend line in. Okay, I'm just going to change the color of that. So basically there's a trend line that doesn't quite run through the origin here because there's obviously variance and errors in the data. But I'm going to make the assumption that any relationship that relates average fantasy points in past history with future projections is going to go through the origin of the graph. So someone who's historically has a moving average of 0 fantasy points probably going to score 0 in the future. So that will once again become apparent as we progress with this. Let me just delete that now. Can I delete it? Yeah. Okay, so there's a relationship there to be had. Let's try and quantify that. Now, to do that, we go up to data, and now I'm assuming you've already installed the data analysis add-in, and we've got all these lovely things, but we need regression. So I'm going to click regression, and for my input Y range, what I actually want to get out of this is a prediction of the fantasy points. So let's put that in. Now, my arguments are simply the 30 game moving average. Remember we talked about whether the trend line went through the origin or not. I'm going to say that the constant is 0, so I'm going to say it goes through the origin. The other thing is labels. If I deselect that, it's going to refuse the data because the input range contains non-numeric data. Well, guess what? I've got 2 headers there, so I have to select it to say, okay, these data tables do have headings. And so now let's put the output range on a new worksheet. Now we press OK. Now here's all the magic. What I'm going to tell you now is basically how to interpret this without giving you a full discussion, which is obviously available on numerous other videos. I'm just going to look straight at what's called the adjusted R-square, and I'm going to say that for the purposes of this exercise, that is a very good value. The adjusted R-square goes from 0% to 100%. 0% means there is no relationship between the 30 game moving average and the output, which is the predicted fantasy points in future performance. 100% means there is an absolute solid correlation between the two. We're at 86.7% here, 0.867. So that in itself is a good result. So one other thing we have to look at, the p-value. This p-value here has to be less than 0.05 for this to be of assistance in the whole formula. So if you put something else in, as we will in a minute, say we put something else in like trend, and that value is 0.15 or 0.25, then what that's telling you is don't use it. So what this is telling me is I have a definite correlation between the 30 game moving average, because that's below 0.05, and it in fact is 86% of the story, or 86% of the truth required to make a prediction. So it's not 100%, but it's pretty much up there. So that's where we're starting now, and to express this in a mathematical form, it would look something like this. So mathematically, that could be expressed by the formula predicted fantasy points equals 1.007 multiplied by the 30 game moving average, and that will give us an R squared of 86.7%. So this is not a bad way of predicting future performance. What the formula basically says is that the player's future predicted performance is about the 30 game moving average, with an R squared, with a confidence level, if you like, of 86.7%. And please Google R squared to get a full understanding of it, but we're using it here as a more or less a confidence level. 0 means there's no confidence, 100% means there's absolute confidence. So this is not surprising, because this is the methodology used by DraftKings and FanDuel. They tend to give the players past average fantasy points scored as an indicator of future performance. So now the question is, how can we improve on that? So going back to our analysis, and once again we see it here, R squared 86.7%, intercept is 0, so predicted points equals 1.007 times the 30 game moving average. P-value is below 0.05, so that's all good. But how can we improve on this? Well, let's just go back to our data set again, and one of the things that I've worked on in the past and I think has great value is in the game of basketball, people can have good streaks and bad streaks. It's almost like psychologically, I believe a player can have a good game, a couple of good games, and then that might spur him on for better performance in the upcoming game. So this streakiness is probably worth investigating mathematically, and the way I've decided to do that is I've got a column here of the 30 game moving average, and adjacent to it I've got the column for the two game moving average. So this particular player here has an average over the last 30 games of 26, and incidentally, because we're at the top of the data set, that might not be quite 30 games, but it will be every game we have to process. As we get down towards 20,000 records, we'll probably have the full 30 games. But anyway, so the way we quantify his trend is over the long-term moving average he scored 26 fantasy points, but in the last two games he's only scored 19. So this guy is having a negative trend. His streak is plummeting earthbound, whereas the next player here has scored 17.2 points on average over his past games, but his most recent two games have shown an improvement over that, so he has a positive 5.7 trend. So basically that's what I'm putting forward as the theory, and I want to check that mathematically now and see whether that has any credence. So I'm going to take that column I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to copy it over to here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run sheet 1 here. Let's call that by moving average. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run one by 30-day, or my input parameters will be 30-day moving average plus the trend, and I want to see if I can get any improvement on this adjusted R-square of 86.7%. If I can, then I'm doing better than anybody who just uses the FanDuel moving averages. So let's go back up here to data analysis, regression. So now my input Y range is the same. I want fantasy points out, but this I have to change. So I'm going to change that to both of those. And constant is still 0, labels, output range on a new worksheet. So let's just go. Alright, let's see what we have here. So now, checking down here, my trend is also valid. The p-value is below 0.05. So what this is telling me is, let's call this first by moving average and trend. So by moving average and trend. So now my R-squared has gone from 86.7 to 96.3. So I'm sorry, we should really be looking at the adjusted R-squared. So, alright, but it's the same there for 1. So now, okay, they're running almost the same. So the adjusted R-squared is 96.3. So guess what? My theory about trends being valid does have some significance in the 60,000 or so records in this data set. So what that tends to make me believe, and I've actually been playing this so I know it is a fact, is that I can make a significant improvement if I were to use not only moving average but trend in my predictions. So now let's look at that figure and that figure and basically quantify that as a formula. So presenting the findings from that regression, it now seems that we can predict our fantasy points by 0.9989 times the 30-game moving average plus 1.0134 times the trend. So is that better than just using the moving average? Well, our R-squared has gone up almost 10%. So if we are using this formula to predict future performance, we are essentially 10% better than just doing it the method of using long-term moving averages. So once again we've separated ourselves from the crowd, and we have a significant advantage here. So I actually play this one. I play it, it's a slightly different formula, but it involves trend, and it's actually generated from a genetic algorithm, but it's nice to know that two different machine learning methods come up with similar formulas. Now that's not to say that we have to end here. We're pretty high up as far as what can be achieved, and we're certainly better than just taking the averages. But let's just play with one other component before we go back to the estimator in the workbook and start plugging this stuff in. So let's just look at one other variable. Okay, now this, incidentally, this is from a great website. I think I put the reference on the sheet. It shows all the past odds for every game, and so I managed to once again write some code that correlates some of the functions we have in the workbook with the individual players. And so we've got things like money line, over under, home or away. So what I'm going to try now for the purpose of this exercise is the over under. Once again, you'll find a function for this. That's where people bet. They say if this game scores over 198 points, then if you bet that side you win, or under if you bet that side you win. So let's just take, because this is a known fact before the game starts. Oh, what am I doing? I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong sheet. Edited player by game. Let's take the over under and let's take it over here as another one of our input parameters. And so now I'm going to run another regression analysis to regression. That's the same. My input X range is going to change. So now I'm putting those three in. Constant still 0. I have labels. Let's see what that gives me. Okay. So once again my over-under is 0.001. So with regard to the p-value, it's under 0.05, so it has value. How much does it add? Adjusted R squared. What does it add to the whole thing here? Let's call this first. Let me just call it by moving average, trend, and over under. So now we've got three components. Let's just paste that in there to look at it. 0.963. Oh my, it does add something, but it adds an insignificant amount. Now that doesn't mean that the over under is not of value. What it means is that, you know, perhaps the trend and the 30 game moving average have components of the truth already in. But, you know, for the sake of this exercise, it is an improvement, if not a small improvement. Now, if I look back at here, the average over-under is about 200. So the coefficient is asking me to adjust by such a small amount. 200 times that. Okay, so the average adjustment on that will be 0.1 of a fantasy point. But you know, for the purpose of this exercise, I think we're still going to quantify the formula because it's the most accurate one we have to date. So let's just switch back and put that on our formula list. Okay, so the most accurate formula we've found so far is predicted fantasy points equals 0.9945 times the 30 game moving average plus 1.0131 times the trend plus 0.0005 times the over-under, and that is an R squared of 96.4. In actuality, it does improve at the 5th decimal point of r squared, so you can't actually see it because we're doing it to 1 decimal point here. And you know, in practice, unless you're a pedant, you might not use the over-under on this one. But once you've taken into account trend, it doesn't seem to me that over-under is worth a whole lot in this case. It makes something like 0.1 of a difference, of a fantasy point difference. But you know, hell, if you want to be the best out there, I guess that's the best formula. So why don't we do this? Why don't we put that last formula now into the estimator so that we can use that as our prediction set. Okay, so let's go to the workbook. There's only 2 or 3 games today, so not a good day to play for us mathematical optimizers. But let's just see what we got here. Oh, 4 teams, yeah. I'm certainly not playing today. Okay, so let's go to the estimator. Now, let's update our functions. Now, we have a fantasy point prediction program that deals with 3 different components, parameters: moving average, trend, and the over-under. So let's just do this. I'm going to start over. I'm going to start here. I'm going to call this trend, and this I'm going to call 30 game. I always say day. 30 game moving average, and it was 2 day, wasn't it? Let's just go back to here, and we had 2 game moving average, so the trend was composed of those 2. So here we go, 2 game moving average. So now you know, I'm going to copy that. No, let's think about this, because I have a coefficient as well, so I'm going to put that in there. Put that there, and I'll put the coefficient in there. So I can close this up a little bit. Close that up. And then what I like to do is I like to just like color them different colors. So that's going to be my trend value that I want to put into there. So back to the trend coefficient. So trend was 1.0131. So 1.0131. Now this equals NBA moving average fantasy points for this player for 30. Okay, so this one equals NBA moving average for this player, comma, 2 games. Oh, this Aaron Brooks is funny. He's been like injured or something. Did I put that in right? Okay. Yeah. You know, I could have. Yeah. Let's just leave that for now. That's definitely working. I don't know what's going on with Aaron Brooks. I think he's been out for a while. So the trend equals that, the coefficient, times two game moving average minus the 30 game moving average. So he's actually he has a very bad trend, and it's multiplied by the coefficient. So that value is the one I'm going to put over. So I'm going to colour that yellow. So that's an output to, if we remember from the previous video, it has to go eventually into here. So the next output is simply the 30 game moving average. So I'm going to put 30 game moving average. I'm going to put copy, paste, and here I'm going to put coefficient for the 30 game moving average, and let's colour that colour that in a different colour. I actually want, I tell you what I'll do, I'll colour this the same colour because that's all trend, and then I'll put down here as that colour is going to be the output for the trend. And see, I messed that up again, so I'm going to copy that and paste that over, and I'm just going to call this the output for this one, if that makes sense. And so eventually I'm going to put that out. So the coefficient for the 30 game moving average was 0.9945. 0.9945, so the coefficient is 0.9945, and this is NBA moving average, that player 30. No surprise, it's the same as the other one. So therefore this output equals the coefficient times that. And of course, once you've done all this, you're going to save the sheet and use it. You save it whatever you want, and you use it again because you don't want to do this every day. And then jiggle around with it as you can. So okay, now the final one, and I'm only doing this, I guess, for to show you we can, and this was the over under. So coefficient and this one would be, what do you do there? Okay, over under, let's spell that out, over under. So this I'm going to change to brown. So once again, that is going to be the output. So now I'm going to have to go to the help because I can't remember what this one is. Let's have a look. So player facts betting. Okay, so NBA Vegas odds and the total number of points predicted for the forthcoming game is known as over under in betting parlance. So it's the second argument is OU. So now I go back, so this equals NBA Vegas odds, this player, comma, and then in parenthesis, because it's a string argument, over under. Okay, 227, so that means this is going to be quite an active game. Okay, so now the coefficient for over under was 0.0005, so it was like next to nothing, but we're doing this because 0.00005, what was that, 0.0? Alright, so coefficient is 0.00005. So therefore the output for this one is equal to that times that. So really, I mean, it's 0.11 of a fantasy point, so not a whole big deal. So the predicted fantasy points, which as we remember have to go in this column, equals the, doing them in the order of the formula, I guess, is the 30-day moving average corrected by the coefficient plus the trend plus the over-under, which is minor. Okay, let's just have a look at this. I don't think Aaron Brooks is a good... Sorry, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let's just look at the top 20 and see how they come out. Right, so so this guy has a positive trend of 1.1. His moving average is that, so alright, so he's on the way up. He's on the up and up at 9.6. Okay, these all look plausible. So basically what I would do now is I would flick this back to all, fill and recalculate, and what I've actually done is I've taken my formula from my machine learning linear regression and I can now transfer them to the solver. So that in essence now is how you get some real horsepower into your predictions. And then of course you can always share your predictions with us and see where you end up on the leaderboard. Let's just refresh that. This actually, what's keeping me up here is an algorithm that came from another machine learning tool called genetic algorithm. It's very similar to the one we just put in. I don't have anything on the over-under, but it does deal with trends, and if I remember correctly, it puts less emphasis on the trend. But I'll see how that works out tomorrow, because it will come back. The server will actually rate me on that algorithm. So what we've basically done here in essence is we have used machine learning tools to generate an algorithm which we've now processed and sent up to the server, and I would now be betting with these. Once again, I'll give these a go, but what I need to do is I need to update the data set here, because this data comes to an end, although it's quite a nice set, 60,000 or so records, February the 5th 2017, so I guess that was the end of last season. But that's how you play the game. And now based on our projections, we are 10% or so ahead of everybody who just uses normal predictions. Or, as that's a good point. Let's just look back at the leaderboard. How is our trusted? So we're also above roto grinders, not by much. I mean, this is all a very close field, and roto grinders is known for its good predictions. But yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you use machine learning to improve your odds of winning. And so I hope you enjoyed that, and you gained some benefit from it. Thank you very much for watching, and bye for now.